Good morning. My name is Kyle Matthews. I'm Executive Director of the Montreal Institute for Global Security. We're very pleased to be here at the Parliament today to launch a report looking at foreign interference, disinformation, and transnational repression. Canada, over the past few years, has seen increasingly more governments engage in its electoral process to try to switch certain or support certain candidates for other foreign countries' interests. We've seen an increasing rise of authoritarian states collaborate and spread disinformation in our society, both on and offline. And we've also seen an increasing number of authoritarian states engage in transnational repression, including, I would highlight our friend Irwin Cotler, a former Attorney General and Minister of Canada, who's been under 24-hour RCMP protection because of threats to his life by the government of Iran. So this is a serious issue in Canada. As an open society, as a democracy, we have to realize that there are nefarious actors out there that are taking advantage of our democracy and have interest in splintering society, and they're pursuing different policies that are against the interests of the Canadian government and the will of the Canadian people. So we're very pleased today to launch this report that was done with support of the Canadian government, of Heritage Canada, and I'd like to pass the floor to Wesley Wark, the author of the report.
Thanks, Kyle. I guess the first thing I'll say, and it may sound a little self-interested, but it really isn't meant to be that way. I just would encourage people to read the report. The intention behind the report, we call it a playbook, was really to try and help Canadians who are interested in this issue, and hopefully many are, especially in an election period, to kind of navigate through all the words that have been written and spoken about foreign interference, disinformation, transnational repression since really the fall of 2022, when this became a sudden matter of interest to the media because of some fairly sensational leaks of classified information that was then, that began a political media firestorm, initially focused, of course, on foreign interference conducted by the People's Republic of China. And in particular, I thought what might be of interest really going forward, we've of course had Justice Hogue's final report from the public inquiry into foreign interference, which was issued in January. It looks like a dauntingly large report. It's 7 volumes, it's 800 pages, but the reality is that there's really only one volume, the overview volume, that people, I think, really need to pay attention to. The recommendations are there, the arguments are made in that one volume. And that final report from the public inquiry, I think, really does serve as a kind of capstone to a lot of this discussion that we've been having in public about the implications of foreign interference, threats to Canadian democracy, and in particular the relationship between foreign interference as it impacts on electoral processes and our democratic ways, the links between that and transnational repression. And so I just say a word about that because there has been, in the aftermath of Justice Hogue's report, there's been some, I think, understandable criticism and controversy around how Justice Hogue handled specifically the issue of transnational repression. She had lots to say, of course, about the challenges of foreign interference writ large. She had some important things to say about future threats, really, posed in the online space through disinformation. But had less to say about how all these things link to transnational repression. And the argument, of course, that she made was that, it wasn't really in her terms of reference to deal with that issue. And I take that argument. But nevertheless, there was an element to her terms of reference which required her to look at the kinds of protections and supports that the federal government can provide to communities who might find themselves targeted by transnational repression in the context of our concern about maintaining democratic processes and having free and fair elections. So some of the report digs into that element, and it may be relevant to this group of speakers in particular. And I think what I would draw from my own reading of all of this reporting that's been done over the last many years is one kind of fairly stark conclusion which is that for all the attention paid to transnational repression by the federal government, by government agencies, the message at the end of the day, I think it's fair to say, is that, well, we can provide you with some guidance, we can provide you with some tools, we can provide you with some information, but it's up to you, that by you meaning diaspora communities, it's up to you to really take this information on board and decide how you can best use it. If that's an appropriate conclusion, I think it is not the way forward for the federal government and its national security responsibilities and how it exercises them. And towards the conclusion of this report, and I'll really just end on these points, towards the conclusion of this report, I really suggest that there are essentially four things that, broad baskets of reforms that really need to take place. And some of these really just follow on from Justice Hoag's report, and some of them are a little different in terms of their emphasis. One of the strong criticisms, of course, that Justice Hoag had when she looked back at how the government had responded to or understood foreign interference from 2018 on to 2024, so really a 6-year period. One of the strong conclusions she reached was that the government had not been sufficiently transparent with Canadians about the nature of foreign interference threat and how it's manifest, including through transnational repression, and that any future government would have to do much better on that front to tell Canadians in a systematic way about the evolving nature of this threat. So transparency was a big theme of the report, and she basically suggested that one of the reasons that her public inquiry was set up in the first place was just those failures of transparency. So she was really calling for a much stronger effort, and I very much echo that in order to inform Canadians. And that's not just a matter of posting reports on websites. Transparency links to the second point that I would make, which is that there have to be really serious and sustained efforts at engagement between the federal government and its national security and intelligence agencies and affected diaspora communities in particular, who might be seeing, who, as Justice Hoag said, are on the kind of front lines often of foreign interference, might be bearing the brunt of transnational repression in particular. And the current capabilities for engagement, I think, are woefully short of what is needed. It's not an issue that Justice Hoag dived into. I think she had the opportunity to dive into it, but didn't seize it. There were, of course, many issues that confronted her in a very short space of time. But I really do think that there has to be a much stronger effort on the part of some key agencies like the RCMP and CSIS to reach out to diaspora communities, to have those dialogues, to understand those communities, and really to have a purposeful discussion. And that would be one way of helping communities help themselves, and I don't think we can leave them alone to do that. A third point I'd make is that I think what Canadians expect in the face of foreign interference, disinformation campaigns, transnational repression, what Canadians expect is for the government to take action to protect them. And action often means enforcement. It means use of the criminal code, legal sanctions against perpetrators of these kinds of acts. We've seen, in my view, far too little of that. It's a complicated question as to why we've seen too little of that. Lack of resources, lack of capabilities, problems with the existing legislation. I think there's an awareness that this enforcement piece is vital and an awareness of some of the problems, and it may be that recent legislation that was passed in the summer of 2024, Bill C-70, will help giving law enforcement agencies the tools they need to really prosecute in this space. We just have done far too little. The final thing I'd say is that, and this echoes some reports, some really fine reports that have been written by civil society actors and NGOs, I think it really is going to be important in the future to call specific attention to transnational repression and its impacts through government attention, through government reporting, through parliamentary attention. The tendency, I think, if you look back over, the kinds of threat assessments and public statements that have been made by the government over the years, the tendency is to make transnational repression sort of part of a broader problem and almost reduce it to invisibility. So I think that has to change. And in the report, I don't have a sort of magic bullet solution for this, but I think transnational repression does have to be highlighted as a special threat to Canadian security and sovereignty, and needs to be treated in a special way, including through some customized, I would say, public reporting to Canadians about that issue. So I guess my last hope, and this is beamed to all the parliamentary press gallery and to political actors who may be following, my last hope is, of course, that with the many issues facing candidates on the election campaign trail and their parties, it will be important not to forget the significant debate that we've been through, the attention that we've been paying over the last number of years to foreign interference and its manifestations, the ways in which that may even impact on the current election itself, to make sure that this is an issue that Canadians hear from all the political parties about, and is one that should be embedded, I think, in election campaign platforms, which we haven't yet seen. So I'll remain hopeful about that. Kyle, thank you.
Thank you, Wesley. I'd now like to ask my colleague Marie Lamensch from the Montreal Institute for Global Security to take the stage.
Bonjour à tous. Bien que les Canadiens soient très au courant de la répression de l'influence étrangère, une des parties qui est fort restée dans l'ombre, c'est la répression transnationale. Ce qui profite exactement aux régimes autoritaires qui veulent faire en sorte que la répression transnationale reste dans l'ombre. Mais ceci, ce qu'il faut savoir, c'est une des raisons pour lesquelles on a un peu parlé aussi, c'est que les membres de la diaspora ont souvent peur d'en parler aux autorités et au gouvernement, ou alors quand ils soulignent les faits aux autorités, ils ne sont pas écoutés. C'est parfois par manque de connaissance du problème, ou alors c'est par manque de recours disponibles. Depuis quelques années, mes collègues et moi, on travaille avec des membres de la diaspora, mais aussi avec des organisations comme Freedom House ou le Citizen Lab pour mettre en lumière justement la répression transnationale et particulièrement la répression transnationale numérique. Donc, par exemple, imaginez en tant que femme, car les femmes sont particulièrement visées, recevoir des messages par des messageries digitales. Vous montrant votre corps de manière très explicite afin de vous intimider. C'est-à-dire qu'on s'attaque à votre honneur et à votre intimité. En effet, à travers les outils numériques, qu'on ne peut plus dissocier de la répression transnationale, vous n'avez nulle part où vous cacher. Nous devons voir la répression transnationale comme un phénomène qui fait partie intégrante du déclin de la démocratie à travers le monde. Les régimes autoritaires se liguent ensemble alors que les démocraties autrefois robustes voient les valeurs de droit et de démocratie s'éroder. Le Canada doit faire preuve de leadership et défendre la démocratie, entre autres en venant en aide aux membres de la diaspora qui sont venus ici pour vivre en paix et en sécurité. Merci beaucoup.
Merci Marie. Et maintenant, j'aimerais inviter Mehmet Tohti. I'd like to invite Mehmet Tohti, a Uyghur human rights activist here in Canada, to take the floor.
Thank you, Kyle. Good morning. My name is Mehmet Tohti. I'm the Executive Director of the Ottawa-based Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project. I would like to highlight a couple points. Justice Hogg was nominated by the consent of all political parties in Canada, and at that time, all political parties, including the government ruling party, they promised to implement whatever the recommendations came up by the Justice Hogg. And one of the recommendations in her final report was about to enact a proper mechanism to filter or monitor the nomination process and election. And if we look at the situation right now and the public discussions ongoing right now, and we haven't seen that political parties any effort to implement that recommendation. And some nominations already announced, and we know their deep relationship with troubling organizations and affiliations of foreign or hostile regime in Canada. And their nominations approved by political parties, and they are going to be part of this election. And secondly, diaspora communities still expect on the government to implement some of the recommendations on the report. And intimidation and harassment and threat targeting diaspora communities still ongoing. And the Chinese government especially still abducting and hostage taking of our family members back home to compel the Canadian citizen in this country to act upon their will, act upon to the favor of the Chinese Communist Party. And that is still ongoing because there is no any adequate protection and insurance offered for diaspora communities. And for that very important reason, and this is the election season, and we urge all the political parties at least read this report and read the final recommendation of the Justice Hogg and read all other reports to address this transnational repression. And the United States, some senators already tabled the Transnational Repression Policy Act, and there is no reason in Canada why we shouldn't do that. And we have to focus on that, and we have to provide that protection for diaspora communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mehmet. Last but not least, I'd like to invite Katherine Leung from Hong Kong Watch to take this stage.
Thank you, Kyle. Transnational repression takes many forms. It could be anything from harassing comments online to threatening emails, to threats on one's life, or even arrest warrants and bounties. And it can be perpetrated by individual actors or in foreign government. What they have in common, however, is that these actions are done to silence an individual for the benefit of a foreign state. This weekend, we saw an example of transnational repression, something that is so unthinkable for an incumbent MP to take part in, that brought into question whether elected officials take seriously the threat of transnational repression and foreign interference. To be clear, this is a parliamentarian suggesting to the public at a community event that a political opponent should be taken into custody at the Chinese consulate and handed over to a foreign regime that has shown no mercy for its opposition. This cannot stand in Canada. To effectively counter foreign interference and transnational repression, we need to take a zero-tolerance approach. The Government of Canada needs to show, in no uncertain terms, that any acts of foreign interference, whether it be electoral or seeking to harm an individual, will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We will detect it, intercept it, and perpetrators will be brought to justice. Regardless of political affiliations, I am sure the news out of this weekend shocked Canadians. The issue of foreign interference and transnational repression cannot be one that divides Canadians along partisan lines. This is an issue not only of human rights, but of national security and sovereignty. If we cannot protect Canadians on Canadian soil from foreign actors seeking to intimidate, silence, or harm, we do not exercise any meaningful sovereignty over our territory. The impacts go far beyond just the individuals that are targeted. When a community sees this, what happens are two things. First, they see that there are consequences to speaking out, that even though they are in a country where freedom of expression is legally protected, an adversarial foreign state can seek to harm them for their speech. Second, when they see that their government is not standing behind the targeted individual, it brings into question whether, if they themselves are targeted, whether they can rely on their elected officials to do the right thing and protect not only them, but our Canadian values of freedom, democracy, and human rights. There is a lot of work to be done on countering transnational repression, and this report comes at a very timely moment. Thank you.
I would just like to conclude the press conference by stating that the report is available on our website, the Montreal Institute for Global Security, MIGSinstitute.org. You can find it there. I ask you to have a look and to share it on social media. And this is a crucial human rights issue. It's about the rights of Canadians being impeded by foreign states. So we have to stand up together, stand on guard for the together in this troubling part of history. But if there are any questions from journalists following us online, we'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. We'll now start the question period. As a reminder, one question, one follow-up. We'll start online with Stuart Benson. Go ahead.
Hi there. Stuart Benson, Hill Times. I don't know how much there's been a bit of an update on the Paul Chang story today from Carney saying Chang still has his confidence, called it a lapse in judgment, that he's made his apologies, but called it a teachable moment. So I sort of just wanted to get your response to that, with Carney saying he'll stand behind him, and then maybe just touch on, there was some saying that this Kang wasn't really genuinely suggesting this, or it may have been a joke. So if you can respond to those sort of defenses as well.
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it'd be important for us to hear from our two colleagues here who are from diaspora communities, from the Uyghur community and the Hong Kong community.
Yeah, sorry, I should have clarified. That was who I was.
So I'd like to maybe, if you'd like to say something.
Maybe you
Katherine,
can
you
start,
first.
from Hong Kong community. Yeah.
Sure. I would first like to say that as an incumbent member of parliament and a former police officer, Paul Chang should have known better. This is a situation that the Canadian government has issued statements on. GAC has come out and said that the arrest warrants and bounties targeting Canadians is unacceptable. They have condemned it. And so it would be, I don't think it goes too far for Canadians to expect that an incumbent MP takes that seriously and acts accordingly. For it to be called a lapse in judgment or a joke, I think downplays the situation a little bit. This is a topic that he should have some expertise on, especially as a parliamentary secretary to immigration in the last government, where he was briefed on why there is a lifeboat scheme for Hong Kongers leaving the territory because of human rights situations. So I think I expected more from Paul Chang.
From Uyghur Canadians' perspective, as long as Paul Chang is in the parliament, and that is a huge shadow for Uyghur Canadians to feel confident. And that person, as a former police officer and a current MP, his primary responsibility is to protect Canadian citizens and their rights. And what we've seen is totally opposite. And this is unacceptable. And not only for diaspora communities, it should be unacceptable for Liberal Party as well. And as I mentioned, one of the recommendation from the Justice Hog's report is to have a proper mechanism to monitor and scrutiny for the nomination process. And Paul Chang's nomination shows that that process is not handled properly, or Liberal Party did not take the recommendation of Justice Hog's report seriously. And we cannot afford to continue like this. And he should be, either he should resign or Liberal Party should handle this situation as soon as possible.
Not sure if there was another question.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up, Stuart?
Yes, sorry, just sort of on a wider perspective. I know you've had criticisms of how the federal government has handled this and not followed through on a lot of these recommendations. But I'm just sort of wondering, have you seen any changes or improvements further down the chain, provincial level, even more to sort of micro local community level, where just the fact that there's so much more, or hopefully more, awareness since over the past 2-3 years of all of this coverage and public inquiries and all of the reports that have come out, have you seen any positive change from that, and just the way that people are now more aware of it? There's more eyes on it, as it were. Have you seen that have any positive effect?
I'll make a few just comments and then open the floor to our other speakers here. I do think that we have seen a wider attention to these issues in the public. Also, threats coming from the United States or from the Trump administration is also making us focus on other actors that perhaps in the past we haven't looked at. I think the Canadian government has been making progress. Public safety is looking to set up a secretariat to deal with transnational repression. Global Affairs Canada had a G7 dialogue on transnational repression at the end of February and wants to put that on the agenda of the G7. These are all very positive signs and messages coming from the Canadian government that it wants to put it as an international and domestic focus. But whether other things are being done at the provincial level or within police forces, I would ask anyone else to take the floor or provide commentary.
Moi, je pense que le Canada a une réelle chance de pouvoir prendre un petit peu le dossier, parce qu'avec ce qui se passe, par exemple, aux États-Unis, on a parlé à beaucoup de nos collègues aux États-Unis qui, eux, n'auront plus la chance de vraiment se concentrer sur la répression transnationale et l'influence étrangère, parce que justement, il y a beaucoup de leurs fonds qui ont été coupés. Donc, je pense que on voit beaucoup d'efforts du gouvernement canadien, des autorités fédérales. Je pense qu'on pourrait voir un peu plus des autorités provinciales, entre autres au Québec. Mais voilà, je pense qu'il y a une réelle opportunité en ce moment pour le Canada de travailler aussi avec ses alliés européens et dans l'Indo-Pacifique.
Thank you. If there's another question, please use the raise hand function on the Zoom. I don't see any other question at the moment, so that will conclude the press conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much.